Hi everyone, my name is Alexis Olmos.
Hi, I'm Brooke Ellis.
Hello, my name is Catherine Cabeza, and today, along with my group members, Alexis and Brooke, we're going to be talking about code switching. So, today I'm going to be talking, like I mentioned, about code switching, but in particular, I'm going to be talking about how code switching contributes to one's identity. Okay, so a little background information about our research project is the following. After learning about the meaning of code switching in class and really understanding what code switching meant and how it meant switching from one language to another in one's daily life, and understanding really how code switching is used in language after watching the videos, after doing the reading and watching the lectures, we decided to focus on this topic and to focus on code switching. In particular, we wanted to research how it is that code switching impacts individuals in their everyday lives. In particular and specifically, we wanted to target certain things like understanding how code switching has an impact on one's personality, on their relationships, on their performance in the workplace, on their social relationships, all those kinds of things, and how code switching really, when it comes down to it at the end of the day, impacts their lives, and how code switching has a role on developing their identity, if it does at all. To find out answers to our questions, we conceived a study that would help us understand and identify different aspects of the multilingual community. To lead our study, we focused on the following research question. How does the use of code switching contribute to the development of one's identity? And how does this have an effect on social relationships in and outside of their cultural environment? So in particular, this was the one question that we wanted to answer. But to answer this one research question, we had to come up with a ton of different questions that we thought would answer this main question, and a ton of different questions that we thought were needed to be answered to really point to this specific. So through all these different questions that we collectively framed together on the use of code switching, we found that the use of code switching has an immense impact on the development on one's identity. And through this presentation, my group members and I collaboratively will express this in our presentation, and we'll demonstrate our results and what we were able to conclude with the results that we found through our research. Okay, so how we went about researching code switching, how we went about answering our questions, and how we went about collecting our research. Well, it was quite simple. We did it by taking a survey, and by coming up with a survey, and by getting bilingual speakers to take our survey, and I will dive into the details in a sec. Okay, so about our survey. We came up with questions very specific to code switching and the role it had in individuals' lives. As I mentioned previously, we had to target specific questions that would help us answer our main question. After coming up with 6 different questions, we created a survey. And then we sent it out to a ton of friends and family, classmates that we knew that were bilingual, and we had 14 different bilingual speakers take the survey and answer all questions. The survey had open-ended questions that had all to be answered in their own words. And we did this specifically because it allowed for elaboration of their answers, and it allowed for more specific answers to our questions. The main reason why we really had the questions be open-ended and had them answer it in their own words was so that we could really understand what each person's thoughts were individually on code switching, and really so that they could explain it in their own words. And after reading through all of these different answers, we were really able to understand the impact that code switching had on each and every individual's lives in each and every aspect. And it was kind of like having a conversation with them. So our main target for the survey was to discover the way code switching influenced a person's identity and their life. And like I mentioned, we targeted specific questions that would help tell us this by allowing us to understand how code switching influenced their identity in terms of their relationships, in terms of their workplace, in terms of their personality, all of these types of things. Okay, so now I'm quickly going to go over the questions that were asked in this survey. So like I mentioned, it was 6 different questions. And the first one was, how does code switching affect your daily life? The second one was, do you believe that code switching has an impact on who you are today? This one I thought was very important specifically because it allowed us as researchers to understand how all these different individuals thought that the impact code switching had was different, or we were expecting the results to be quite different, but it was actually quite the same. After reading all the different answers, we were really able to pinpoint all the main ideas. So that was one of the key questions. Question number 3 was, how do you think code switching has impacted your identity? And that kind of correlates with question number 2. And then question number 4 was, has code switching gotten in the way of your relationships with others in or outside your cultural community? This one was also key to our research just because it allowed us to understand how code switching influences one's relationships and their culture, as well as their everyday communities. The 5th one was, have you ever been negatively impacted by your use of code switching in situations? And this one also allowed us to really understand the impact that code switching had on one's personality and the way that people were able to address certain situations because of how they're so used to using code switching in their everyday lives. And then the last one was, do you think that code switching in your language has affected the way you talk to people in your life? So these were the 6 main questions asked that we talked about and that were able to lead us back to answer our one main research question. And now I'm going to pass the floor along to Brooke.
So we wanted to go over the key results that we found in this survey. The key results were about the impact code switching has on an individual's daily life, and it was identified that each bilingual speaker noticed some sort of pattern of development that aided them in building their own identity due to code switching. It was an astounding response by all 14 contributors, which stated that code switching affected their lives in regards to the way they communicated with people around them. All of the participants in the study noticed that communication was the area which was most affected by their use of code switching in their daily life, which seems to be obvious, but in the responses, the study showed that each person had a different experience with their code switching, whether it was with work or with older family members, etc. The second key result was about the impact code switching has on identity, and the results were that more than half of the participants mentioned that code switching impacts who they are because it brings them to better connect with their cultures, and code switching also helps them demonstrate the types of cultures they come from. And this question brought us to the conclusion that code switching plays a key role in allowing individuals to develop cultural identities as well as individual identities, which means that cultural identities are increasingly important, especially today in societies which strive on individualism. More than anything, cultural identities help bring people together, which was shown throughout the responses in each category. Next, we wanted to go over some overarching concepts and questions that we covered in the study. So the first concept was how code switching impacts the participants' level of communication with others of the same and different language communities. And half of the participants mentioned that code switching had gotten in the way of their relationships with others, and half said that the code switching had not gotten in the way with their relationship with others. We noticed that those who said it did get in the way of their relationships said that because they were having trouble translating a certain word to a language outside of their cultural community but could not. By showing us this barrier that multilingual people face, the participants showed us that this is not a universal experience. Some face challenges with multilingualism that some do not, which we found to be incredibly interesting. The next concept was how code switching has a negative impact on multilingual individuals. A majority of our participants said that they believe that code switching negatively impacted them due to racism, stigma, and discrimination, while the other portion of the group, which felt as though there were no negative impact on their life, was due to outside factors. They were all white passing individuals. This relates back to the idea that race and ethnicity can impact the way individuals communicate with each other. This idea that people communicate differently based on their race or identity is interesting, and it also is a key factor in why code switching can be extremely integral to the development of one's identity. The next concept that we wanted to cover was how did the participants in the study react to the research question and what that tells us. The participants of the study were vulnerable enough to show us, the researchers, just how they think about their culminating identities. From this research, we have found that the participants that code switched often stated that it impacts their identity by giving them a freedom to express themselves and express the way they wish to be perceived by others. In stating that they have a level of comfortability with code switching, even enough to have an impact on something so vulnerable like expressing themselves and how they are perceived, the participants showed us something that we weren't really expecting during this study. They showed us how human interaction and language in society truly shapes the people that we become.
So circling back to our area of focus, how does the use of code switching contribute to the development of one's identity, and how does this have an effect on social relationship in and outside the cultural environment? Based on the answers given in our survey, we found that the use of code switching had an impact on two things. One was a vast impact on one's everyday life, and the other was an impact on one's identity. A key factor that is affected in the individual's daily life with the use of code switching is communication. Depending on whom the individual was speaking with or communicating to, would result in a different experience with code switching. All in all, we found that code switching varied from person to person. Code switching has impacted on individuals' identity in the sense that it causes a greater connection with their culture. Given that culture on its own already plays a role in identity, code switching allows people in the same environment to come together now more than ever. With this, both cultural identities and individual identities are created. There were clearly limitations to our study being an undergraduate research project, but we believe in the future looking intently into the connections between code switching and its impact on one's identity. This concludes the end of our presentation. Thank you all for listening.